All right. Well, we got my other Mike from space, and it's been a while, my friend, since we've had you on, and you're very, very advanced in your work, and not too many people here, I believe, probably aren't familiar with it. Do you want to maybe give a little background, and do you have something you wanted to show?
Not really sure where to start. It kind of depends on what you'd like to hear about. I could tell you about work I'm doing in alchemy or anti-gravity or free energy, or tell you about my history in particle physics and the reverse engineering we did on coral castle levitation.
Well, we want all of those, so maybe start with your history in the particle physics, then go to free energy and anti-gravity, if you don't mind, and then we'll talk alchemy at the end.
Okay, so I was in the Navy from 88 to 93, and my father sent me a book on particle physics, and it's really the only thing I had to read for about 6 months or more, and I really get into it. So when I got out of the military, I started coming up with my own theory because I couldn't swallow the idea of a photon bouncing between two other particles and somehow magically sucking them together. And Einstein is, one of the people that actually said, if you read what he really talked about and wrote, was that was just a shortcut. So I was reading a magazine article by Stephen Hawking, Christmas Eve in '95, and he suggested that black holes may be creating all particles. So I thought, well, why didn't he explore that any further at all? So I did, and it eventually led to realizing that there are no black holes and that stars are creating all the particles, and they make it look like there are black holes just because of the way space itself funnels space itself. Basically, you have every galaxy they find has a supermassive dual funnel black hole in the middle of it, and they'll tell you this, but they don't explain why or what it has to do with anything. And then we have an even distribution of galaxies, which is just one of the many pieces of evidence that makes you wonder, why are they evenly distributed? And I figured out the heart of all this is that the stars, which are kind of imitating black holes, are sucking up, basically they're consuming the smaller half of particles in the universe, mostly the electron neutrino. And by consuming these, they make new large particles and spit them out the opposite direction. And this flowing opposition is what causes everything that we know of as magnetic current. It causes the passage of time itself. It causes everything in a galaxy to function the way it does, or in an atom. It's all a function of mass versus energy. And if you apply this to mathematical terms, you can do this now simply by, you want to start out with cosmicporch.com, and you can see the full map of field unification there. It was put together by Azra Wind, and she's not the person who discovered this prime spiral relationship. It's actually a friend of mine that discovered this, and he'd been making comments on my YouTube channel as far back as 2008 or so. And that was Peter Plichta. He wrote a book, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a pretty darn good start that explained how the atom is basically energy flowing between the primes. So the prime numbers do something that other numbers don't do. They'll actually cause charge columns to interlock. So for example, if you have magnetic current flowing on let's say a metal bar, let's say like I happen to have like a copper bar right here. If you have an oscillation of charge in this copper bar, you're going to have a tendency for magnetic current to split. So you'll have positive go one way and negative will go the other way at the beginning and at the end of the cycle, most prominently. So when you have, let's see, 7 of these, for example, you end up with a cloudbuster. I'm sure you're familiar with those, but that happens for a reason. It's because the magnetic current rubs against the other vertical columns of magnetic current. And charge is the sum of negative and positive. It's the sum of poles. And matter, believe it or not, is actually a third pole. So you'll see a lot of examples of this in some of the most interesting devices that have been invented in history. They all take advantage of that charge column interlocking. And the Coral Castle device is no exception. So let's see if I want to move beyond that. Geez.
That's fascinating. I'm loving this. And like last time we had you on, you were showing several very advanced inventions that you've made with like triple solenoid layering coils and a few others. So
Right. So that's something I'm working on right now. It's been delayed because I've been working on alchemy for the last month or more because it's just really got me sidetracked. I found there's three new ways to grow gold that I only kind of recently heard about, and one of the guys, I don't know if I trust him, he talked about how you can make gold from lead and lithium with ozone. So the ozone will supposedly charge the lithium into a LiO3 state that when bonded with lead should remove 2 of the neutrons off lead and obviously 1 of the protons. Now I tested this myself and it doesn't work, but maybe it's because I didn't seal it in wax, and wax may be a big key to the process because it'll produce CO2 gas, and I know that CO2 gas was necessary when we did make gold successfully in microwave experiments. So I started a group on this back in 2017, and we replicated John Maluski's work. He died in 2018, by the way. But it's awesome. Not super productive. It only made about $5 worth of gold in a crucible that would most often crack, and you had to take an inverted microwave and modify it by filling it with ceramic bricks, or build a larger custom microwave, which is one of the things I did. But
was that the one where you're using glass? You're microwaving the glass into the gold, or was it this different metals that turned into gold?
Well, so what it is it's actually ferrite quasicrystals that were present in the fly ash, and they would seep into the soda lime glass that already had a good population of fly ash in it. So when you did Maluski process, you had a crushed glass layer sitting on top of a very thin fly ash layer, type C or F, it doesn't matter. And that sits on top of ferrite disc. And when you microwave it, the ferrite disc gets the charge oscillation. So you get a little bit of a plasma field that moves across the surface of that. And you're basically going to cause that glass sand to reach a gooey state where the ferrite begins to mix. And when it starts to mix, it'll start to arrange in certain patterns. And I apologize, I don't have a picture that I could show you right now, but basically it's always the same exact pattern, and it's actually a 0-point energy pattern. It creates its own 0-point energy circuit. At only 100 times magnification, you can see this, where the ferrite will become a bead surrounded by 2 rings of smaller beads. So you have 16 beads around a single larger bead. And it's exactly the same every time. It doesn't produce gold unless it actually makes that exact pattern, and it'll do it a lot. Unfortunately, it's really just a proof of concept because again, it just didn't make that much gold. But you can also do this by taking soda lime glass and mixing in 8 to no more than 12% by weight ferrite oxide, and you microwave those into a solid green glass. Then you cool it off and take it out and you crush it, and then you take that green glass and you throw it in on top of the ferrite disc, maybe with a little bit of an insulator, and you'll actually be more productive in growing gold that way because you get a really thick layer of it. So it'll go from green to clear to pink, and then right after it starts to lose its pink color, it'll start forming these gold spikes, basically wire gold, but it only grows maybe half a millimeter thick or so up to the surface.
That is fascinating and invaluable information, my friend.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the work you're doing. So have you heard, though, that the gold that's produced with lead, specifically the isotope, is radioactive, supposedly, for up to 14 years, one group was saying?
Okay, so you're talking about the Chinese nuclear reactor gold. Yeah, I know about that, and that process is something else, and that's actually a nuclear decay conversion. So that's one method of creating gold, and I think they said with one of their plants it makes like 5,000. Was it 5,000 pounds a year, or was it 5,000? It must have been 5,000 pounds a year or something like that. I don't know.
Wow.
But it's kind of useless if you can't use it if it's radioactive.
Indeed, and then still decay, right? So does it end as gold, or does it decay further?
Well, and one of the things I forgot to mention about the Mollusky process is you always had to take a pinch of flour, literal flour, like cooking flour, and just get it on the top of the glass when you microwave it, because it made a CO2 layer, and the CO2 induces some plasma. And I think that's one of the reasons why this didn't work when I did this 2 nights ago, is I didn't seal the lithium in wax, and wax will give off, basically it's got a lot of carbon in it, so I think that's why it didn't work. But I'll test it again. I only have so much lithium. The dang stuff is expensive. It's $58 just for 10 grams of this stuff, and that's like a tablespoon.
Wow.
So I used up about 1 tablespoon of it a couple nights ago, and I've only got about 1 more to go through. So I'll do 1, maybe 2 more runs. We'll see. But I'm just kind of doing that one for fun. The one I really want to do for real production involves a totally different method. And this stems off this guy who did wastewater cleanup back in the early 80s. His name was Jim. I forget the last name. He grew gold wire inside of charcoal by accident, and wasn't going for that. But what he did is he made this wastewater cleanup system work off of his extremely powerful ozone generator. So when I finally looked at the plans for this dang thing, it looks like a Joe cell. I'm sure you're familiar with the Joe cells, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the Joe cell was actually a Tom Bearden invention, and Tom Bearden was the guy whose paper I read back in 1994 or something. I don't know. And he was the guy who basically gave me the secret to zero-point energy, which is pump Z waves in sync, yet out of phase. When they implode through a nonlinear medium, they have to fold and combine as a sum of their wave peaks to form a single higher frequency. And basically, that's the key to everything in the universe, and how lost force is converted back into usable energy. Where was I?
About the third method of the gold, and that it was through the Joe cell, and that
right. So with gold wire. Now what he did is he made an impossible to replicate patent. It would cost many thousands of dollars to reproduce his design, and I could do something maybe like it. I'm not an electronic engineer, so it'd be kind of tough for me. But long story short is I figured that you don't really need that. All you really need is a good ozone generator to supply one side of it, which is going to pull into a ground state, a positive ground state. So when you have a 0-point energy device, it's always spitting out a waste product, which is positive ions. Make one super efficient enough, and it'll spit out positive ions so concentrated and so fast that you produce lift. And that's what the artifact is, and that's what this is here. This actually uses 3 layers to produce basically a catapult effect. And this is upside down, but you can see the massive transforming capacitors, basically a flux capacitor bank that I have in there. And what that does is it uses the ferrous casing to hold, it maintains charge, and this charge implodes through the layers of the capacitor. So in some cases in 0-point, you want to use successive rings, but you don't have to. You can actually use something spiral. And that's actually the case in Keeley, you know, Keeley.
Yes, sir.
So Keeley's long lost invention of the free energy generating motor was secretly, now Ford, got rid of all the records of his employment there, but Keeley actually worked for Ford in 1907 on the 1908 charging system for the Model T. And I actually have some of the antique coils. Let's see if I can pull one out here. I've got a few of them around. Here's one right here, kind of laying down and behind a dustpan. So you see that?
Amazing.
Okay,
Wow.
so you see that these are 1/4-inch wide flat wire windings, and they're 15 to 20 layers thick. And basically the magnetic V's, there's basically 16 V's that are mounted on this right here that will pass over that. This is being rebuilt right now, but as this rotates around, it's going to cause charge to modulate in all those coils. So that's part of it. And then there's this other thing where you have this thing is not mounted on here right now, but it would hold 2 negative centered cow magnets or something similar to that, which is what I've got. It's basically going to allow negative to push against itself. So when you get negative to push against itself in 3-phase current, so you have to use a circuit loop. You're getting, if I can get this phone to stand up, Jesus. But when you get negative and positive to fight each other, the positive always loses because it's weaker and it's slower and it's heavier. So in that circuit there, you're basically causing charge to modulate using the distributor on the vehicle, which will hit 4 times for every full revolution. And that boils down to 2 cycles on each as it passes over the nubs there. And that'll produce 40 horsepower with the old magnets, which were 3.5 pounds or so. Today we have N52 neodymium magnets, and those are about 35 pounds. So it's about 10 times. So I can't say I'm going to get 400 horsepower, but it should come, quite substantially higher than the stock 40 horsepower. When I ran this before it flew apart, it would actually turn this this power head, and it's got some junk on top of it right now, but that's a 24 kilowatt power head right there. And it weighs about 1,000 pounds, but it'll produce 120 volts AC continuously. No problem. So that thing had more than enough force to turn that thing over. But so that's free energy, and you could use that in any vehicle, and it's nice because it's portable and it doesn't depend on earth ground. But if you wanted just a lot of free energy to sell back to the power company or use yourself, the easiest way to do that, it may not be 60 hertz, but you can actually just plant like bury an old engine block in the ground and weld on a piece of rebar and run it up through 3 copper plates. And what happens is, you know what Schumann resonance is, obviously. Well, it doesn't just spawn on its own. It's not resonating with itself. It's actually resonating from the Earth's charge modulation, which currently is about 18.07 hertz or so. Back in 1980, it was about 10 hertz. And then the Russians put up this antenna array and sped it up to 11 just to see what would happen. And then they shut it off, and it didn't go back. It stayed at 11 for a while, and then eventually started speeding up even more since then, because the Earth's magnetic field has been fluttering out. So anyway, you take that rebar, run it through 3 plates of copper that are maybe 1/4 inch separated, and what's going to happen? Charge is going to try to charge up all of those plates the same at the same time, but they don't like that because they're dielectric. They're next to each other. They're going to repel each other. They're dynamos repelling each other at 120 degrees out of phase. So all you have to do is run that rod to spark gap, and the other side of spark gap goes to the top of the pyramid that covers the thing. So the pyramid can be tinfoil as long as it has a good sharp copper peak. And what happens is the pyramid and the ground will take turns containing that leftover charge modulation. And as you slowly open up spark gap, you can cause the Earth's charge modulation to get stored up as a capacitor more and more on each side. So you just keep opening up spark gap, and the 0 point is the apex of the pyramid. So you have all these waves that start out as a single 3-phase wave, but because it dies out and slows down as it compresses, you get more of them behind it. So it's like a continuous staircase of this imploding charge wave that just keeps on folding off the apex of the pyramid. And if you take the spark gap, instead of having it inside the pyramid, you run that through a pair of PVC tubes to maybe 50 feet off the side. You control the spark gap out there. That's where you actually get your free power, because you'll have, in the 9-gauge wire or whatever you use, 9 gauge is ideal, you're going to wrap a coil from one of those wires around a transformer core, and you get your free energy from the influence coil. That's, you know, if you know how a transformer coil works, everybody, it's really simple. You just have the power supply winding that doesn't directly connect to the secondary winding, but the secondary winding is either a step up or a step down, depending on the size of it and the number of winds.
That's amazing.
I mean, you could open that thing up until the wire literally melts. So Tesla did this in Colorado Springs. If you read all about old Tesla's work in Colorado Springs, that's what he did. But he didn't use a pyramid. He actually used, I think it was 9 plates or even more than 9 plates, but it was a multiple of 3 in a tower with basically a Tesla coil to burn off the energy. But that's very similar to pyramid technology. And I could tell you a lot about the pyramids of Egypt and what they did that was different and quite a lot more interesting, but I don't think I want to get into that tonight.
Okay, we'll have to do a future episode on that. Noticing the 16 numbers coming up a lot with your work and what you've discovered, and does that tie into Coral Castle at all in some of what Ed was doing, or is because he had the Sweet 16, right? And that's one of the numbers, but then it goes into primes, prime quadruplets. And are you aware of that work? And is it part of what you've done?
So 16 is really just the apex of energy efficiency about the flower of life pattern. And the flower of life kind of sits in everything. And it's actually in this design here. So we have 32, 24, and 16 poles on this thing here. It's what I call the artifact. So it's a natural thing as well. So if you look into, so when they decided to make power transmission lines for nuclear reactors and hydro dam power plants. They didn't want to waste wire, so they had to figure out what's the most efficient way to pack wire in a jacket to carry that energy and transmit it over a very long distance. And they tried every possible combination you can think of. And what they finally came up with was this pack that involves having a single wire in the middle, surrounded by 6, surrounded by 10, surrounded by 16. And you'll notice that same pattern is actually what runs through Earth from the north to the south pole. You've got the vial vortices of Earth that you count 10, except for the north and south pole if you count those, so you have 12 if you count those. But basically, when you go from the Bermuda Triangle, Devil's Triangle, and all these triangles that are just above and below the equator, there's only 10 of them. And it's also very interesting that the Earth, every 12,900 years, will flip 120 degrees like clockwork, and it's about to do it in 2031. But when it does this, the whole energy grid stays there. It doesn't change. The geometry is such that when you flip it 120 degrees, it can still have that same pattern. So this is also why it only flips 120 degrees exactly every time, because all those ley lines are fairly permanent in the Earth. And it's actually the second grid system in recorded history that we have. According to ancient history, we had an A grid, and we're currently on the B grid because the continents, the Earth grew and the continents expanded, and Earth growing is no longer a theory. That was discovered by Neil Adams. If you don't know about Neil Adams' work, you really got to look into that. He passed away not too long ago as well. I think everybody's dying now. But he showed not just the Earth grows, but everything else. So he showed astronomy photos of moons and how moons are expanding. They're growing. Our own moon has been growing. Every heavenly body out there grows, gets bigger over time. So about 150 million years ago, the Earth was actually about, I think it was 20 or 30% smaller than it is right now.
I do also subscribe to that and believe that our sun is now turning into a white pulsar from the yellow dwarf that was the previous cycle. But that's a little controversial, but I'm glad that more people are looking into this. And so you said you replicated or figured out a bit of Coral Castle. What did you build from Coral Castle?
So replicating Coral Castle, I decided not to even try to tackle that until I have enough money in the bank. And believe it or not, I'm kind of disabled. I'm just feeling good enough now to where, I finally saw my chiropractor today. It was delayed like over a week because the VA. But I've been kind of intermittently handicapped for the last few years, and it really screws with my research. So I've got a major back injury from the military, from the Navy.
Praying for your health. And another guest that joined us, Chris, might actually have a device that helps with that potentially, as I believe, Chris, you said it helped you recover from your car accident. Wow. He's not. Chris, you muted it. Talk. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. PEMF device prototypes that I'm building right now.
Well, that's very interesting. I'd like to learn about that. So maybe just make a comment on one of my videos or something, and I'll sub to your channel. I'd like to learn about that, whatever you're building there.
That's
absolutely, and we'll get Chris to show a little off.
That's one of the main reasons I'm here to share.
Nice. Yeah, it's quite possible this thing could do this machine I'm building now could do something like that. But if I turn this thing on, it literally absorbs all the radio frequency in the area. Because I mean, look at when this thing powers up, it burns off, even at the lowest output, it'll burn off a lot of energy. And when it burns off energy here, the bottom layer, when this is flipped over, gives off a really heavy flow of positive ions, the waste product. And that waste product is actually what heals. And God, I could tell you a lot of stories about that. I think one of the most interesting is that, God, I was so an old TV show called Sightings. There was a fellow who was up in the work cutting, he's cutting wood, working with his brother, I think it was, and the chainsaw ran right into the top of his left hand. He cut it open down to the bone, and on the way back, he was on the highway. It was pitch black outside, and he had a bandage wrapped around it, and it hurt like hell. So he had it up on the top of the pickup in the wind where it stayed nice and cool. Well, he was coming up on this bright light. He's like, "What's that?" And they slowed down, and he stopped, and about 500 feet ahead of him was this big purple spherical UFO that it was stopped and hovering over the road. So when they stopped, his engine shut down, and this thing flew right over the top of him after sitting there for a minute. And they're like, "Whoa, what the heck?" And he's like, "Okay." So the engine had start back up again, and they took off, and he continued on down the mountain. He's like, "Wait a minute, my hand doesn't hurt anymore." So he took off the bandage, and the damn thing completely healed. So that was basically the positive ion stream coming out of that craft. There's no magical frequency involved, nothing like that. It's just a matter of having a concentrated enough positive ion stream, because it will induct. Basically, it's a pure boson format without filler. And when you have that, you can induct all the other particles in magnetic current. So whatever your DNA wants or needs is going to flow along, and it's going to pull minerals with it. And basically, that's my theory on how you can do instant healing. I'm not sure if I'd want to do that to my back. I might heal something in the wrong way. Might be better to do that slowly.
Fascinating information, and it's parallel with some others that I've heard recently, that I've got some upcoming interviews with people that I connected with at Teslatech as well as Moon Lake Gathering, and what you're describing is very on point. So you mentioned very briefly that one aspect was an anti-gravity effect that you're getting from this as well. Do you want to maybe go into that a bit?
Yeah, that's really simple. When you split charge through any 0-point energy device, you get energy goes one way, and that's the negative pole is in bias to negative ionization. Negative ionization is basically a stream of the lighter half of particles in the universe moving through the heavier half of particles in the universe. So everywhere you go, in order to have a neutral ion charge, you have a complete mix of all the particles from large to small. So whenever you have ionization, you actually have those splitting. And you may find that you'll have temporary inclusions of a little bit more negative or a little bit more positive in some space. So like when you see a lightning strike, that's where a positive ion has been accumulating in the clouds of a rotating magnetic field where turbulence is kind of connected over a few miles long or so. And then that suddenly seeks out the Earth's very negative ground. Earth has a massively powerful negative bias to its ground modulation. Does that answer your question?
A bit. So that would, I guess, does it still work once we're like outside of the Earth's field though?
Well, yeah, because anywhere you can find any level of neutral ionization, and that be pretty much anywhere you are in space, unless you're dead stop between maybe 3 or 4 galaxies, and there's no flow of time whatsoever. If you were there, though, you wouldn't exist anymore anyway, because all your atoms would fly apart. Because without this flow opposition that you get near any star, you're basically going to succumb to nuclear decay, and that'd be true for any element on the periodic table. So when you're transforming free energy, what you're actually doing is you're imploding the charge kinetics from the larger particles, which are generally the ones that flow from the stars and flow, they spin off from a galaxy and they accelerate on their way out. So that's why we have a disk-shaped galaxy that has a thinning sheet. And as these bosons accelerate on their way out, because they're moving faster and faster as they accelerate, they're also opposed by time energy that moves faster on the edge than it does towards the middle. And that's why you have a gravity difference. That's why you have stars out there that can orbit a lot faster than they do towards the center of the galaxy near the bulge. But to answer your question, basically you're taking the kinetic energy of electron neutrinos that is influencing the vibrations of the larger particles they oppose. You're imploding that and turning it into a higher frequency. And by doing that, you're splitting charge. You have to split charge in order to do that. So you have negative ionization moving away, positive ionization moving the opposite way. Your positive ion is a concentration of mostly the end of the positive pole, but it's actually a mix of positive and negative. And it's heavy. It's actually as heavy as gold. And when you see a craft that's sitting there in a ball of light or a disc in a ball of light, and I saw one over San Antonio, I think it was, not San Antonio, but Amarillo. I was in Amarillo in 2008, and I was hauling a load of steel west. It was a perfectly clear day. And I saw this glowing disc. It looked like a football because it's shaped like a football from my standpoint. It was about 5 degrees up on the horizon and just sitting there over these radio towers in Amarillo. And suddenly it started to move left and right. And I was like, what the heck? That's not a reflection. So I stuck my head out the window and I could still see it. So I knew it wasn't a reflection. And that thing basically was, what it's doing is it's bending space-time around it by changing the shape of the ionosphere around it. So you know how Earth has an ionosphere. If you were to change your ionosphere to a droplet shape, it would squeeze itself through space. The reason it does that is because electron neutrinos, which are getting consumed by the stars, are going to propel it just like they would propel anything that didn't have a spherical shape. It would try to squeeze it in the direction that it was aiming. So that's kind of both dematerialization and anti-gravity in one. If you have more questions, go ahead.
Nathan, you got any?
Oh, I got a lot because we're building this stuff.
Exactly. So, I figured. I'll let you ask so here.
When we took a DC flyback and we split it positive and negative and rotated on the top clockwise, counterclockwise on the bottom, put magnets on the bottom, got a magnetic field going. I put the Tesla coil to the center, created a node by using the center of the Tesla coil itself. So all of that negative you were talking about went in right to the center, made a node. What we do is to pump the top. So it keeps pumping it and pumping it and pumping it. And it's drawing more and more energy out of it every time it does it as it sits there. But what the Tesla coil actually does, because it's connected between a little bar that goes to my positive and negative of my DC flyback, I'm able to control the DC flyback frequency because now it's meshed with that. So that field you're talking about that goes in between the negative and the positive right there and creates the one where they mesh together, I can actually create that on the outside. So it'll either hold in the energy or it'll push out the energy if you switch it to the rotating disc.
Yeah, depending on the cycle. So that's what I call an ion diode effect. And any zero-point energy device has to have some form of an ion diode over at least 3 points of charge in order to pump charge in opposite directions.
Nice. So yeah, it works really well to hold that thing in or push it out. And then we created another device that used an anode and cathode effect in order to create rings inside of it of resonance. So you'll see it in like the photograph in the photo. It'll show up in the backside of it, right? And it'll look just like an image that comes out of your camera. But then when you put it under infrared, you can actually see the same thing build out in it. And if Bernie's still there, I could put up a video of it and show it to you.
Yes. Is it this one? Or no, this is CB. caves, I believe, maybe.
Sure, show me. I'd like to take a look.
Yeah, give me 1 second. Oh, put it.
Get that next.
There you go. You got it?
Oh, yep.
So it starts out as just a simple reaction, and then it goes into this, and you can see it right behind it. And if you look in it, you'll see the concentrical circles in it, inside and outside, and you'll see the null zones in it.
So exactly what am I looking at here? Where a Tesla coil is hitting, what is it hitting? Where's the energy hitting?
This is AC flybacks, and it's hitting a piece of clay.
Clay, okay.
Yeah, and there's a bowl underneath with stainless steel. The anode itself is stainless steel. And then underneath, there's a little bit of water, and there's dabbed water on the very top when it starts the reaction.
Uh-huh.
And then what you're looking at right there is you see the orb going back and forth, but in the back, you see the camera image of it. So you can see exactly what it's doing on the inside of it. If you look close, and I don't think it's got a great picture here, you'll be able to see inside of the green itself, every single ring.
You're certain that's not a lens effect, right? So there is a lens effect in cameras.
Oh, I'm aware. But when we did the temperature test with the camera, it showed the same exact thing.
Okay. Yeah, what it looks like is an ionic distortion. I can say that much. So ions do bend light. That's quite interesting. And that it's green as well. I don't want to make any flash assumptions here, but assuming that has nothing to do with the lens flare or something, then that would be definitely something to do with an ionic refraction. But yeah, there's a lot I could say about that, but it's without looking at everything, I don't want to make any assumptions.
Yeah, we're getting a temperature differential as well going on in between each spot where you see. I don't know if you can see it in this one that well, but every time you get to a different color, it goes dark, and then it gets lighter, and then it gets brighter in the color, and then it gets dark again. In every one of those, we're getting a temperature differential that goes on between them.
So that is
hot and cold.
Yeah, so those are ionospheres, and you are creating basically, it looks like you've got 3 ionospheres at once going on there, which is natural. Everything always does sets of 3. And the reason for that is that 3 causes charge confusion. So by the time you get 3 of them, you have a clockwise, a counterclockwise, and then a clockwise rotation. And in time space, basically that forces that envelope to be sealed by a carrier wave. And if the carrier wave cannot then replicate in 3 layers, then you're not going to see that at all. But basically, I think that's what you're looking at there. So thermokinetics is a meson particle that's basically halfway between the electron neutrino weight and the heaviest boson weight. And if you produce 0 point off of mesons themselves from, say, a gold-coated copper sphere, which is one 0 point energy design I found in crop circles way back in the early 90s. Then you will see that.
Well, I could show you the frequency on the oscilloscope as well, and how they're rotating and stuff. And let's see if I can't show that one. There you go, Bernie, if you want to throw that one up. So you see it's all out of whack, and then it'll go into coherence here real soon.
Yeah, if you had a few oscilloscopes or something that was capable of measuring more than 3 or 6 frequencies at a time.
See, there you go.
Oh yeah, it finally synced. Is it going to stay there? Or?
Yeah, it'll stay right there for. I got it up to 3 minutes, no problem, staying just where it is, just like that.
Okay. So it's formed a balance. Interesting enough.
And it shows you the 3, and the frequency difference between them is not very much, but it's enough to separate them.
You know that. So you've got one Tesla coil there.
There's no Tesla coils in this right here. This is just a AC flyback anode and cathode with a like a frequency generator type thing. It's like got a 555 chip in it, so it levels the frequency between them, so it creates resonance between the anode and cathode.
Well,
because they're equals.
What's the max voltage you're getting here?
I'm not sure what the max voltage is on this one.
So somewhere in there, you got to have a high voltage. You don't have like a high voltage coil in any of that. I mean, you would have to.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's an AC flyback.
Okay,
there's 4 of them all together in the unit.
Okay, so 4 of them. Now that's very interesting, and that reminds me of work that was done. Well, I won't bring him up because he's kind of a real nut job, but taking 4-phase, what you're actually doing is you're adding a carrier wave to 3-phase current, and it'll naturally cause itself to cause that 4th wave to become a carrier wave if given the right circumstances. So if you want to do something really impressive, what you want to do is just separate them. So you'll have something that creates 3-phase current, and then have something that's completely independent of that produces a carrier wave. And it doesn't necessarily have to produce a pump Z carrier wave. It just has to produce a carrier wave that allows 0 point to fold and split, and it will end up becoming a pump Z wave, because when you cause the 3-phase wave to fold over, it's basically going to prevent itself from being involved with that carrier wave from then on out, because charge splits. As long as you let charge split and give negative and positive both an exit route that's away from each other, so they cannot connect, then you'll see the efficiency climb up like you wouldn't believe. And that's exactly what I was explaining before with that pyramid design, where you can just connect onto a grounded item and multiply it by 3.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I also built Tesla coils, so I built them out. How do I want to say this? Where you could take a driving Tesla coil and just take a number 2 Tesla coil, just the number 2 winding with the PVC pipe, and I can put it out like 3 to 4 feet from it and start it up without the frequency or anything on the primary having that far of a distance. So we got about 8 volts in this thing, so the distance is only about this far. But my number 2s are out further than that. They're about 3 feet away. And what it's doing is it's creating like a node in the center, and then it's creating a vortex going to the top and one going to the bottom. And you can get a null zone and then energy on the top and energy on the bottom. The crazier thing is the amount of energy is higher in that coil that's out there than is in the driving coil. When you put the light next to it, it lights it at a further distance than the one that drives it. And I can do it to that one, and then another one, and another one.
That's because you're using one Tesla coil, and charge spins at a greater rate at a further distance. So this brings up some work that John Hutchison did, and I can tell you a little secret that he exposed for a split second on one of his videos some years ago about how he was melting metal. And that's one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. And when I talked to him on the phone before he sold his equipment, and I asked him, "Were you using electric steel?" And he said, "Oh, you're very perceptive." And I was like, well, I knew we were using electric steel. So electric steel is the only iron that they used apparently when he did those experiments. And electric steel is basically a high concentration of silica. So it allows the ferrite atoms to vibrate between columns of silica. And he didn't just use a single large Tesla coil. What he actually had was, let's say you take this coil here, and you'd have a tuning tower next to it. And the tuning tower consisted of only 9 rings that were variably spaced. So they'd all be spaced the same, but the top ring would sit exactly 30 degrees down from the top of that Tesla coil. And that was a secret. It wouldn't work otherwise. You had to have that 30 degrees. But that tuning tower, which was just a set of rings that were able to slide up and down on a PVC or whatever it was the key to causing the metal to melt, because it added a resonant frequency to the charge modulation, and it did something else, and that is it caused the end of that. You know how the acceleration would normally keep going out? Well, it had to share it with this thing. So if you were to use 2 Tesla coils side by side, you're going to discover something really amazing. And the Germans figured this out way back in the 40s or something. But 3 Tesla coils too might be interesting. I'd like to see what that does. But with at least 2 Tesla coils sitting next to each other, you're actually squeezing charge as it's trying to reverse poles all the time. So whenever you do that where charge is trying to reverse poles, space itself is forced to become more superconductive. And then if you resonate that at a certain frequency just by using spacing plates, then that will actually multiply as a continued fractal. And that's what he did. He actually formed a continued fractal. So he had 3 different, well, one was a quasi-coil, it was because it was just the spacers, but you had 2 coils in the Tesla coil, obviously. And then the rings would act like a third coil. So you had 3 different frequencies. And whenever you do that in particle space and allow that to focus off the apex, which you're getting 0 point off the top of a Tesla coil, even though it's not over efficient because it's not making energy all the time. It's wasting it and then it's making it. It's wasting it and it's making it. But if you do that on certain frequencies, you can actually cause the destruction of atoms. You can do some things I probably shouldn't even be talking about here. Some of the research that was done by this Italian back in the 90s, he met this fellow researcher of a guy who made this death beam, and basically used a multiple of 11, like Tesla figured out. You could use a multiple of 11 of the resonant frequency of anything. So if you took that continued 3 and you listened to it to find out what frequencies came back, the one that doesn't come back is the one you want to produce. And when you start producing that frequency, you can basically beam that right into a solid granite rock and cause it not just to shatter, but to obliterate in particle space, literally disappear in a magnetic current. You won't see it ever again. A lot of that will end up coating the walls of the hole that you made through the thing. So you can't do this just with regular coils. You have to physically push it out of a set of ion tunnels, and that means basically using something that looks like a cloudbuster. You've got a single hollow tube surrounded by 6 other hollow tubes. They're all the same. And and you could do this not just to obliterate matter by doing the 11 times, adding that carrier of an 11 times slower frequency, but you can use it to create new matter. And this fellow did that as well. So he was taking chunks of PVC foam that were 10 by 10 by 10 square, and he'd saturate them for 5-10 minutes with a super positive field. I believe he's using 26,400 hertz, which is 50 times 528. And that's just my own theory, because I've seen that in other work as well. Like, for example, you can cause a pigtail light bulb to run off 1/20th power if you run it at that particular frequency of 26,400 hertz. If you can play with that frequency on your Tesla coil, I suggest you do so. You can see some interesting stuff with fluorescent lights and all kinds of other things.
Well, I do use the ring, the one ring at the bottom. I put an extra ring on it, and then I have built out several other rings, and you can, if you take a capacitor bank and you're able to switch capacitors on and off at will, like I have, then it'll jump to different frequencies in the coil. So I didn't know if it was those rings giving me that extra frequency or the coil itself, but that makes a lot of sense in what you just said, because I can flip in between either one of them and get resonance. You know what I mean? And one's
whenever you have three dynamos, they'll run each other. They'll run themselves in a loop. You're always going to feed back shared charge in a loop circuit if you allow it to loop. But yeah, let me finish what I was saying there. He was basically accumulating ions in this PVC foam, and after a few minutes, you'd see a flash of light, and lo and behold, the 10-inch block of PVC foam would turn into a 9-inch block of solid gold. And he had a pallet of this shit sitting in the background with a whole pile of all these PVC blocks that he had as well. And he didn't just use blocks. He made this shape like a funny little man or something, and he had that standing on his wooden table there. And he turned that into gold too. That was really interesting. They always shrink just a little bit when he did it. I think what I'll do later is when this gets posted as a video or whatever, I'll go back onto his page there and I'll post the link if it allows me to do that. But it's on Rumble. I don't think it's on YouTube. Maybe it is, but I don't know where it would be. But there's a full video on this guy. It's a little Italian guy back in 1992, and he used a beta or VHS tape to record this whole thing. But if you could do that today, and I think it's quite possible, I don't think you'd actually have to use his machine. I think there's another way to do it. Then yeah, you could get filthy rich pretty dang quick.
Wow.
And that's not radioactive gold. That's basically, it's the accumulation field that sits there would allow it to be so, it's basically so positively ionized that it wouldn't hold radioactivity in the first place. Because it doesn't form from nuclear decay, it's actually pulling particles right out of magnetic current. And the reason it does that is matter is a third pole, but it's also, and it can be particles of decay from the negative and positive poles of magnetic current. And that's also why the Earth grows. So our sun is constantly spitting out neutrinos that we can track. And you can look this up and you can see how the neutrinos will change state as they leave the sun, because sometimes they'll fuse back together or they'll fly apart. But when those do that and they're part of magnetic current, you've got magnetic current thinking, oh, that's a certain meson particle or a certain like a muon neutrino, for example. And then it starts to pass through the atom and it gets caught. And it gets caught by other particles of the same size. When you have three of them that are the same size, but they're also so decayed that they're also close to or within matter's range. So imagine three poles as being three spirals of mass that grow off a central spiral. So whenever you start off with all the particles in the universe, you start off with the smallest one, and you go a slightly larger and a slightly larger. As you do that, you're making a three-arm spiral. Simple enough, right? Mm-hmm. So matter is just one of those arms. So when you get a particle decay from negative or positive, it can turn into a particle of matter. And because decay is so slow, that's also why planets and moons, heavenly bodies, don't just explode instantly. They grow slowly over time.
Huh. That's really cool.
I'm just trying to find a reference picture that describes exactly what you just said, Mike, has to do with some UFO patents that I found, but it's not coming up for me. I think I'm in the wrong folder. All right. Before we move on to Chris, I do have a couple more questions, Mr. Mike, about the alchemy work you're doing. Is it strictly in regards to gold, or are you doing other transmutations and LNR cold fusion processes?
Well, gold is the easiest thing to make. And basically, it's what everything boils down to. So when heavy elements or any elements break down, it's quite easy for them to become basically pure energy for a moment during that breakdown. And pure energy is basically a 0-point focus crossing point in a vortex that substantially adheres to the element carbon. And you'll find that, you know, a lot of these reactions that people do, that you can make platinum and you make platinum from hematite and platinum group metals from hematite. But the one, I think it's the lower oxygen version of ferrite oxide, that's the one that produces gold. So it's going to be the black ferrite, while the red and yellow not so much, but the hematite, which is the red version of ferrite oxide, will produce the platinum group metals.
Really? Okay, I'm making a lot of each of these and isolating them. Please go on.
So, you know, that's just one of the methods, and that's what Molesky actually discovered. And then his were unstable, so he'd create platinum, or what looked like platinum, and he knew he had platinum in there. He'd test his platinum on the spectrometer, but then he'd leave it set overnight in a sealed glass container, and he tried all kinds of different kinds of seals. And every time his platinum would just disappear. It'd literally go through the jar and become part of magnetic current once again. And I'm convinced that he didn't melt it down and energize it properly before he let it sit, and that's why it decayed. But
so I know the two ways of stabilization. You have to keep it in a solid magnetic field while it's going through that, as well as a directional electric charge.
Right. It'll make its own field. You just have to give it a little bit of voltage, like 0.3 volts or something. Exactly. That'd be my guess.
I fully agree with that. You're saying gold's the easiest, but then were there, like, how much alchemy are you getting into exactly? Like, I want to pull you for as much alchemical knowledge as possible, because that's my specialty and I love it, and you are on point, my friend.
Well, I'll put it this way. It's a lot easier to make metals than it is to make anything else. And that's because carbon is such a good host, and it's also such a low number element. And being such a low number element, you have what's called an initial ion spike moment, where the atom, when it first forms, you have, like lithium, for example, you have a proton, a neutron, another proton. And that's basically the first solid element that's not never going to cause like nuclear decay. It's actually very healthy for the body. It's not poisonous to the body. I think they found out that lithium is actually very beneficial to the human system, to any biosystem. But if you take a let's say carbon atom, which is, I think that's 8. No, oxygen is 8. What was carbon? 6. Yeah, 6. So carbon has 6 centers, and believe it or not, and, you know, this is not on Wikipedia. You have a hexagon, and the hexagon has basically a formation of intersections surrounded by bosons outside and also on the inside. So when you have time fueling everything and forcing that third pole to suddenly get integrated with both negative and positive, you have a disturbance, your initial disturbance, okay? So when you initially disturb an atom that's going to end after just 3 protons and 3 neutrons or whatever, like carbon, for example, the whole energy event of the thing is going to spike up really quick and drop down. And you can't do that with, every element is different. Because they're all different, you have this great advantage of carbon over other elements to do certain things like cause energy envelopes better than anything else. So if you use ozone to work with carbon or plasma to work with carbon, you can cause that energy envelope to spike and contain something if you've got an ion diode effect going on. So in every one of these things, like this guy Jim that I told you about, he had used ozone to produce gold through charcoal, but ozone wasn't the real trick. It was only half the trick. The other half the trick was he had 0-point energy in a grounded bucket. He was using an earth battery. So the two were seeking each other out. And in the middle, in this charcoal where the ozonated water was dribbling down and the positive charge was coming up, you end up with a meeting point. And because it was oscillating, but it's a pump Z step wave. So the step wave was oscillating in one direction for negative and one direction for positive, and that's what allows the accumulation to take place, and that's why gold grew there. But there's other ways you can actually use beams, like, the Boyd-Bushman magnetic beam amplifier. Are you familiar with that one?
I'm familiar with Boyd Bushman and some of his work, but I don't know if I've heard of the beam one.
Okay, so that was basically one of his most ingenious inventions. If you take 4 neodymium magnets and you aim them at each other, or 6 of them, and I made a couple of these, and then you take one more at the back and you aim it through them and you wrap a coil around it. If you pump a frequency, whatever frequency you pump into the field around that back magnet, it's going to be amplified exponentially as it passes through the intersection of the others. And it's actually a 0-point effect. So you can get a free energy transmission off of that. So if you're trying to produce a certain frequency super efficiently, that's the way to do it. And you can start off doing it with just one, but you can actually chain those. You can daisy chain them and amplify the effect. So you can start off with just like a 9-volt battery in the back and turn that into an incredibly powerful amplification over a series of those things. So maybe 5 or 6 of those in series would give you such a massive charge amplification that you could take any frequency that you want or set of frequencies and step them up into a very massive ion charge modulation. And that means that if you were to aim that through your pipes at a carbon block, think what you could do. You could resonate at a frequency of a certain element like platinum or titanium, for example. If I was going to grow anything, I think I'd be most interested in growing something like titanium. But that's just me.
What about iridium?
Any of them. Basically anything. You just got to make the frequency for it. Yeah.
Question from the chat: have you coated any of the magnets with gallium first?
Well, it's kind of unnecessary. If you were going to do that, you could amplify the effect of a single set of magnets, but there's no point because all you really have to do is add another set of magnets to amplify it a little bit more in the daisy chain.
So you're saying the frequency dictates the material you're making?
It can, absolutely, yes.
And the specific resonant frequency, correct?
So there are circumstances where it won't do that. So let's say you have, like in Mollusky's gold, the carbon itself is just a host. And then he had ferrite oxide in there in quasicrystal form. And that allowed things to act like individual capacitors and do what's called a pulse orbital discharge effect. So they'd make their own frequency. And they'll do this in anything that can move around in like a gel or a liquid.
Oh my goodness. So I literally have these iron ferrite welding rods that are coated in carbon. And then I've turned them into electrodes where they've turned into that black oxide that is in a gel state and immersed themselves in that carbon and are completely black now. Essentially what you're describing. So the next step you're saying is then to microwave them with the silica, or what should I do next with these?
A microwave is going to destroy just about anything you put in there.
Okay, so no microwave.
Yeah, well, you're talking about a sample that I don't know. You'd have to have a really hefty sample and then use the microwave at a really low power output. You'd want to use like a Panasonic inverter microwave at the lowest levels. So they've got some that are variable if you can find them, but nowadays they just make them with 10 different power levels. I've got one here, but I don't know. That's not really going to beam anything in because it's not able to hold charge in position. You need to be able to hold charge in position. So you can send a frequency in, but it's not going to hold it in position in a polarized way to where ions are forced to line up and not reverse polarity. So the microwave is actually the wrong way to do it because you're constantly reversing polarity. What you really need is an ion diode effect. So any modulation that's going on is really just something that's feeding this charged diode effect. And it's going to do it from outside where your experiment is. So you don't want to actually cause polar reversal in the material you're trying to make. What you really want to do is accumulate.
And I know what you're talking with that, and I've never experimented with them into the microwave yet. So that I was going to try putting monoatomics first in and seeing just what that does. But the diodes that are the iron that are in the black oxide state, that next step then would be connecting them to a frequency generator and experimenting with the frequencies, and or I usually also have them surrounded in solenoid or a triple solenoid that I put the energy through to get them into that state.
Well, what the Italian did was wasn't his ingenious invention, but basically I need to tell you this is what you really want to do if you want to control a charge frequency and keep it polarized in an experiment for alchemy purposes. And that's something I should probably send you an email or something.
Yes, please. That would be awesome. Yeah, we don't have to put things out publicly and then just talk privately and then do the experiments and then publish, right?
Yeah, I'm not afraid to give out my email. So if anybody needs to, then it's omegazap@gmail.com.
That is awesome, and appreciate Mike. Do you got any more questions for Mike, or shall we move on to CBK, who's been patiently waiting? But first, questions for Mike. You have any CBK, Chris, Lulu, other Mike, if you're still there? Nathan?
I'm here. I'm just listening. Fair hand.
Any questions? No.
Oh, all right. So there is a bacteria the other day I read about that it eats up heavy metals and it turns them into gold. I mean, since we were talking on the topic, and then you mentioned that the decay of heavy elements could turn into gold. So how does that we're talking a biological entity and something that's just matter.
Right.
No.
So any carbon string like carbon DNA, at the very end of its DNA strand, it's a living plasma.
Okay.
that's where the flow of the healing current terminates, and it has to circle back around or spray off and die out, whatever. And that's actually something that I started to do back in 2017 or so, right around the time I was doing Mollusky stuff. But it's super slow, really, really slow. It would grow gold on the surface, but it would take like a month, and it would only be like a not even paper thin sheet of gold on the Petri surface. But yeah, that's accumulation, and I can't say one way or the other for sure if that was coming out of magnetic current, but I'd say most likely it was. It was just that plasma termination event that happens there. And in this case, it was doing it right at the surface of water.
Thank you.
At the surface of water, you say, and you're saying it was plasmatic. Was it an ionized plasmatic effect or another one, if you don't mind? Go a little deeper.
Well, ion charge is basically the sum of a pair of negative and positive ions that are coupled on basically a force frequency. So they're stuck at a certain frequency, and normally they don't do that. So with carbon, you have this continuous channel of negative and positive ions that are flowing in opposite directions because there's a difference in the mass of the poles. So negative and positive, they have slightly different weights, and the positive will always be pushed away from a negative reaction. So everything in your body, I don't know if you know this, is negative against negative. The only thing that's ever been in the body that's been positive, or what they would call anions and cations. I kind of forget which is which, but the COVID vaccine. Well, I probably shouldn't say that on YouTube, but that actually gives you the opposite. So it's an extremely unhealthy thing to have in a biological system. But yeah, when you have all these negatives forcing each other away from each other in series, you end up with a sudden positive at the very end, and that's why and where plasma is basically just charge that is flowing with a higher velocity than you'd normally expect. It's a polarized form of charge. If you want to do something really interesting with that bacteria thing, you could use ozone on one side, and once again, a zero-point energy device in the bottom of the water. So you could use an iron bucket, like a feed bucket. That's actually what I'm doing here. And I'm going to do that with this. It's like a 30-gallon iron bucket from the feed store. They're like $106. And you could ground that out and use it as your collector for the positive side of a zero-point energy circuit. So if you're going to do bacteria or any method in there, it's always going to work a lot faster with a better ZPE device on one side and a stronger source of ozone on the other side, up to a certain point. If you have too much ozone will just wipe everything out. It's very destructive. And I don't want to keep stepping on everybody's feet here by taking up all the time, but I'll just say this. If you take, and everybody should do this just for fun, take something that'll produce maybe a little bit of a high voltage. I think you need at least maybe a 20-volt arc between two wires inside of a test tube. And you seal that test tube with silicon putty. So not like a silicon glue, but get some of the silicon aircraft putty off Amazon. It's like a clay, and you can reuse it. But you seal up the top of that test tube, or maybe a 500 flask, for example, and you leave water inside. Doesn't matter how much, but you're going to notice over about 30 days, the water disappears. And in its place, you eventually get this oil. It's kind of a dark oil, and it reflects light in a very strange way. If you're going to do that, I suggest using a test tube, because you're probably only going to want to make a really small amount of this stuff. This stuff is extremely dangerous. I mean, you don't want it to touch your skin. If you put any element in there, doesn't matter what it is, this stuff is going to eat it up. And it's going to turn it into something that does really weird stuff, because it's basically a living ozone. If you pour this stuff out on the floor, it will actually move towards you. And that's the same thing that happened with Jim's thing, where he had this puddle that formed under the iron bucket, and it would move around.
I definitely am doing this, and you're giving away some alchemical processes and I guess initiated like information I've read in the past, but I've yet to try it. And I'm loving your description, and whether you just learned that from your own work or read it somewhere else. But it's like I have definitely read ancient texts essentially describing a very similar process of making this specific type of non-water gel organism thing, sort of thing, right?
It'll amplify the effects of any element you put in there. Now, some elements have a tendency to destroy themselves, so it'll amplify the self-destruction event. If you put copper in there, it'll try to make more copper. If you put gold in there, it'll try to make more gold. The problem is you don't want to do that, because it's basically something that really steers itself in some really funny directions, and it'll theoretically, who knows what it could eat through. It might eat through the silicon container itself, because ultimately it's unpredictable. So I'll just say that.
So is it like an antimatter kind of properties?
Yeah, and what it really is actually, you know, negative and positive. What you don't know is that they're actually differentials. Negative and positive are not just a single negative and a single positive, they're differentials. But there's also millions, if not trillions, of poles beyond that effectively are moving well beyond the speed of light all the time. And the higher you go on the number of poles, the faster it moves. I think that's actually the key to the human soul. We're actually in existence of something from all 9 density, or all 7 densities, from 3 to 9. And our very soul is something that connects with all these other poles. It's built into our very DNA. Anyway, I think that's all I got time.
So here I have some of my black ferrite oxide, and it's zero magnetism left, or once it goes through this state into the powdered monomolecule state.
Ferrite is dielectric unless it's fused. So it's, yeah, I know. Is there anything else in there besides ferrite?
Nope.
Okay. Just ferrite. It looks like a liquid though.
Oh, water. Yeah, it's in water. It's at the bottom of the water.
Okay.
So, sorry. Yes, it's in distilled water.
What a wonderful experiment.
And then there's some of the monoatomic, where it's straight whites. I got to start drying them out and conducting more experiments with it. And then the purple golds that the U.S. Customs. So I told the Customs it was either going to show up as nothing in the mass spectrometer, or it was going to show up as carbon in the mass spectrometer. And they said it did one of the two, but they wouldn't tell me which one it was.
Yeah, so that's a slightly fused version of the monoatomic, and I know that because whenever you start to get the color red, the same thing happens in the glass in Milewski's process, and that's basically just a form of gold that has just started to become non-ormous and move on to the fused version of gold, where it's more solidified. And it'll stay that way in glass forever. And I imagine
it has few years. So it's I took the white version's gold that I had, this being a mixture, and I put it into the Equinox Sun, and it turned purple. And then I took the white version of monoatomic silver I had, and I put it in a full moon, and it turned into the purple versions. And then now I've kept them in that state in a few different jars for a few years now. But this one was a mix of the two that I took down as a sample. And so the monatomic gold was made out of 24 karat gold anode and cathode, and it was the sacrificial anode that broke down into that original white powder that then turned into this purple state. And then the silver was the same process, only using 99.99% silver 1 ounce coins into it and doing it. And then it's both of those into this, and it either showed up as nothing or showed up as carbon. But they wouldn't tell me which, so I got to try it again or get another mass spectrometer to see what it is.
Yeah, the spectrometer is going to destroy the gold, and it'll bounce back off the carbon. But when it hits the gold, I don't think there's going to be much of anything left until you get it kind of past that state there into something more fused.
Yeah, it's just interesting and confirms that it's in a completely different ionic state than solid gold, essentially.
Yeah, solid gold has 6 sides. 3 of them are slightly longer, and it's extremely similar to carbon, and that's why they bond together so well. They're very similar geometrically.
Yeah,
anyway,
it does, right? And it goes into. Are you familiar much with
good frequency?
The Walter Russell periodic octoscale?
Oh yes, absolutely. And I hate to say this, but I think my cell phone battery is close to running out. It could happen any minute here. I'm on red.
Oh dear. All right. Well, in that case, we want you to also see Chris's presentation here a little bit. If you want to get into it quick, Chris, so Mike can ask you any questions before his phone dies.
If I happen to cut out, I might come back with.
This is the
charger
first
plugged in.
prototype that I put on there for you.
We can see plasma coming out of the incandescent bulb, right?
I have a little delay in my thing here. Yeah, so the bulb is a regular ceiling fan bulb, and then it's attached. I glued it to the top of an orgonite pyramid, and I put the legs on it to set over the top of the coil, so it has the height.
You know,
So,
you've almost got a
zero
0.
delay.
You've almost got a 0 point there with
that's
that.
the first prototype there.
Sorry, you guys are having the delay there. Mike was saying it's almost to 0 points.
So the coil pulses the.
Yeah, I get it. It's
pulse the PEMF through the orgonite and then through the bulb.
Yeah. You know, you could put a resonator in there. If you put maybe 3 pennies in there and spaced them just right and connected them on anywhere to maybe one of those legs, you might actually get an added frequency to that. You could do 3, 6, or 9 little tiny sheets of copper.
I'm gonna bring up. I have about 28 pictures I can share here.
Okay, do you want to share it all as your screen so we don't have to reshare each time, and you could just flip through them?
Well, actually, let me go get my charger,
Oh, sure.
Absolutely, Mike, for sure. And
Yeah, let me see.
thank you so much. Like, absolutely epic. And we need to do several 2 more hour full episodes with you. Amazing wealth of knowledge and work.
Give me 2 minutes. I'll be right back.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to build it and we'll see what it does.
I love it.
Well, you got to remember, you're not going to get very far until you start bouncing a charge wave. And for that, you really need a spark gap. You're going to start with a closed spark gap and slowly open that up. So if you just build an orgonite device, it's always going to come fixed position, whatever it's got. So, naturally it's got materials in it. They're going to resist each other, and you're always going to get all kinds of three-phase waves, negative or positive. And that crystal, it's a great electron resistor, and you can use it to your advantage more as well if you were to polarize it in the direction of the ion charge pump.
All right. Thank you all, and we will do this again soon.
You crazy mother. Yeah.
It's just Bernie. Hey, Bernie, just like last week, huh?
Weekend at Bernie's.